Search operations at the Sewol disaster site continues, but hope is dimming amid fears the bodies of the missing may not all be recovered from inside the ferry. Two subway trains collide in Seoul Friday afternoon, injuring some 170 passengers. North Korea replaces its top military commander. What does it say about Kim Jong-un's grip on power and the future of inter-Korean ties? We find out. Welcome to ARIRANG News. I am Kang Tae-ri in Seoul. The search for the missing at the Sewol disaster site continues with operations there well into its 17th day. With more, Kim Ji-yeon joins us from the News Center. Ji-yeon, one body was found earlier today. That's good news, but off 4.5 kilometers off the site, it's raising questions about whether we need to expand the parameters of the search. No?
Right, Cherry. That may be the case. There are growing concerns that the bodies of the victims might never be found, as some were clearly carried away from the accident site by currents. Just 2 days ago, another body was found 2 kilometers northeast of the site in the opposite direction from the one found today. So it's hard to predict which way the bodies may drift, but also just how far the search area may need to be expanded. Some of the victims' belongings have been found as far away as 30 kilometers away from the ferry. Layers of nets were set up around the site a week after the ferry first capsized.
I see. Now, there are so many speculations, of course, as to why and how the ferry sank. And we seem to have one take from an insider, that squarely points to negligence.
Right. One of the employees that was questioned today admitted that he knew overloading cargo onto the ferry could cause it to capsize. The employee, identified as Kim, was in charge of loading cargo onto the Cheonghae Marine Company's vessels. And earlier in the probe, the captain of the ship, Lee Jun-seok, apparently told prosecutors that he had warned of too much cargo to Kim. So speculation that the company simply chose not to heed those warnings for financial profits is brewing. And also, prosecutors arrested another senior employee today on suspicions of manipulating the recorded figures of how much cargo was actually on the Sewol ferry after hearing that it has capsized.
And some of the key figures in all of this, the de facto owner of the ferry operator, Yoo ByungEun, of course, and including his son, have refused to show up for questioning.
That's right, Cherry. The authorities are trying to close in on those related to the practical owner of the ferry company, Yoo ByungEun, to find business irregularities that may have contributed to the ferry sinking. But they are having difficulties as those, including Yoo's sons, have refused to answer to the summons for the second time today. So the prosecutors gave Yoo's son a new deadline and an ultimatum, saying if he does not answer this time, they will proceed with necessary measures. I'll keep you updated later today.
Thank you very much, Ji-yeon, for that. And President Park Geun-hye says she believes that it is her duty to officially apologize for the ferry disaster. A meeting with the religious leaders on Friday, the president said she will do all she can to ensure that the missing passengers are found, and once again pledged for an overhaul of the national disaster response system. Now, her apology for the government's poor management that came earlier this week was criticized because it was not addressed to the people, but rather came during a cabinet meeting. And as you can see, the ferry disaster is affecting the political arena in Korea, not only the top office. And ahead of the June local elections here, rival parties are doing what they can to distance themselves from the government. And as our Choi Yoo-sun tells us, the ruling party could take a hit come election day.
The Sewol ferry disaster has completely overshadowed the upcoming local elections in June. With only about a month to go before the polls, the ruling and opposition parties are keeping their campaigning relatively low-key as public criticism of political leaders grows over their inability to cope with such disasters. The latest surveys show poor government handling of the man-made disaster dragged President Park Geun-hye's popularity ratings to below 50% for the first time in a year. In the past, it's been the government and ruling party that have suffered the most politically from a disaster, giving the opposition an upper hand. But this time around, public mistrust spreads from the government to both ends of the political spectrum. In a move likely intended to distance itself, the ruling Saenuri Party on Friday criticized the government for its mishandling of the crisis. Party floor leader GeunHye then urged officials to mobilize to help the families of the missing passengers who have not been working since the Sewol disaster on April 16th. The opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, on the other hand, said onus of the disaster falls on the government and its absence of a sufficient disaster management control tower. Co-leader Kim Jong-un said instead of waiting for the government to determine who's responsible for the ferry's capsizing, the National Assembly should lead the efforts. Despite the political blame game, political observers say the outcome of June 4th elections may be determined more by voter turnout, as many Koreans still feel despondent over the tragedy. Choi Yu-sun, ARIRANG News.
Now, moving on to another accident that occurred this Friday afternoon right here in Seoul. Two subway trains collided with each other, causing close to 200 injuries. Now, let's go to Kwon So-ah, who is standing by for us at the news center. What's the latest, So-ah?
Teddy, a subway train traveling on Line 2 that was heading from Sangwang-simri Station to Seongsu Station collided with another subway train that was stationary at around 3:30 p.m. Korea time. A fire chief said around an hour ago at a briefing that 200 people have been injured, including 2 foreigners. Around 150 are being treated at 12 local area hospitals. Now, 2 people are said to have suffered bone fractures, and one of the drivers involved in the accident was seriously injured and is undergoing an operation.
Now, so it's such a difficult story to digest here because subways are just a part of our daily lives. Do we know what caused the collision?
Well, witnesses say one of the trains seemed to be having technical problems, that it was slowing down and stopped and started a number of times before it crashed into the subway car ahead of it. They say they heard a loud crashing noise and that many inside the subway cars fell due to the impact. The lights also went off immediately. Victims said they did not receive any instructions, nor did they hear any announcements for about 15 or 20 minutes, causing a lot of confusion and disruption. However, the CEO of Seoul Metro said in a briefing that around 5 minutes after the crash, the first announcements were made in both subways. Now, passengers said they had to force the subway doors open and escape on the subway tracks to the next station. The cause of the accident still needs to be investigated on. Now, what we do know is that the 2 subways were not automatic but manually driven by these drivers. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport announced earlier that it will organize a central countermeasures headquarters to look into the possible cause. Meanwhile, the Seoul Metro CEO said that the next briefing will be held at 9 p.m., while recovery of the accident would be completed by around 10 p.m.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
UN Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to... North Korea has a new number 2 within the regime. GeunHye is out and Hwang Byung-seol is in as a top military commander. No word yet on the reason for the sudden shakeup. Hwang Sung-hee has this report.
Out goes GeunHye, in comes Hwang Byung-seol. North Korea has replaced its top military commander in a sign the regime's young leader may be struggling to maintain his grip on power. Reporting on a May Day event Friday, the North Korean Central News Agency introduced Hwang as the country's military politburo chief. North Korea watchers are keeping a close eye on Hwang, who was promoted to the position of vice marshal less than 2 weeks after becoming a 4-star general. Why Che was replaced remains unclear, but Kim Jong-un's recent criticism of military officers suggests it could be more than Che's reported health problems. The latest power shift comes less than 6 months since the execution of Kim's uncle Kang Song-taek, and some see it as a sign the young leader's grip on power is still shaky. But South Korea's unification ministry says it's too early to jump to any conclusions.
We were certain about the purge of Jang Song-taek and the dismissal of Lee Yong-ho because it was reported after the extended meeting of the Political Bureau of the Party Central Committee. So far, there have been no such reports on GeunHye.
Meanwhile, hopes for better inter-Korean ties are fading fast amid the regime's ongoing threats of a fourth nuclear test and cross-border slandering. North Korea has been stepping up its aggressive rhetoric since U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Seoul last week, when he vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder with South Korea against any provocation by the North. Experts say this is part of North Korea's efforts to find its way back to the negotiating table. 황성희, 아리랑 뉴스.
A group of overseas Korean business leaders visited the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex in North Korea on Friday with hopes of boosting inter-Korean economic exchanges. Around 30 CEOs and members representing overseas Korean traders made the trip. They said they discussed with North Korean officials the possibility of establishing factories at the complex and future investments with hopes of globalizing the joint industrial complex. Washington has tapped its next ambassador to South Korea. The name is Mark Lippert. He is the current chief of staff to Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel and has been a close advisor to U.S. President Barack Obama for years now. Shin Se-min has more on his profile.
Mark Lippert, one of U.S. President Barack Obama's oldest and closest aides, has been nominated to the United States' next ambassador to South Korea. Multiple diplomatic sources say the U.S. government notified Seoul of the impending announcement during President Obama's visit to the nation last week. If confirmed by the U.S. Senate, Lippert will replace the current ambassador Sung Kim in the second half of the year. Kim, whose 3-year term is nearing an end, is expected to return to the State Department in September. As for Lippert's credentials, the 41-year-old is currently Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel's chief of staff. At the age of 32, he became the foreign policy advisor to then-Senator Barack Obama. 4 years later, he was appointed as National Security Council Chief of Staff and in 2012 as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs. Experts anticipate that Lippert will strengthen relations between Seoul and Washington. Former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Kurt Campbell was quoted as saying that South Korea would be lucky to have Lippert, who is close to the president, as U.S. ambassador. Lippert is expected to focus on bolstering trilateral cooperation between the U.S., Korea, and Japan, with an emphasis on rebalancing power through stronger security ties. The aim would also be to prevent China from taking the lead in North Korea-related matters, such as when it comes to countering threats out of Pyongyang. According to Pentagon officials, Lippert believes that security cooperation and historical disputes should be approached separately. This could be a concern to Korea due to sensitivity over Tokyo's interpretation of history and territorial claims. Nevertheless, South Korea's embassy has welcomed Lippert's nomination as he has a good reputation among diplomats in the country. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Paying his condolences to the victims of the Sewol ferry disaster, Finance Minister GeunHye has called on all government ministries to work on correcting irregularities. His comments came at a meeting on Friday with other policymakers where he also emphasized the need to do everything possible to support the victims and their families. On a separate issue, Hyun pledged to help local companies advance into emerging markets through free trade deals. The government believes this will provide emerging economies with growth opportunities. Korean auto sales in the U.S. market spiked last month on the back of 1, improved economic conditions, and 2, low interest rates. And it was the biggest ever sales for April for Korea's largest automaker, Hyundai Motor. Hyundai sold more than 66,000 units, a near 4.5% rise on year. Kia Motors also performed well with sales up nearly 13%. Auto sales in the U.S. usually picks up in the month of April, but this year the boost was pronounced. Total car sales rose to about 1.4 million, the highest level since 2006, before the financial crisis. One of the best things about living in Korea is that a wide range of delicious food is just a phone call away, or should I say a touch on a smartphone away. Mobile applications are also jumping into the food delivery market, and business is booming. Kim reports.
Food menus meet with internet technology. This is the concept a growing number of people are embracing in Korea, including 36-year-old Im Hyun-woo. Returning from work after a long day, Im opens a food delivery application on his smartphone and scrolls down to decide what he wants to eat.
I live alone, so I usually order from food delivery applications. There's a lot more variety to choose from. I don't have to worry about losing menus.
These types of food delivery application companies have created a profitable business model. They receive around 13% of every order in commission fees from participating restaurants. It's another way of tapping into the prospering food delivery market that is estimated at around $9.7 billion and growing at an annual rate of more than 20%.
The payment systems on smartphones have given direct access to hundreds of restaurants, helping the food delivery application market grow at a fast pace.
The love for delivery comes from the national character of Koreans who prefer things fast, faster, and fastest, which puts a premium on convenience. The rising demand has made the market a competitive one, with food delivery application companies battling it out for a bigger piece of the pie. In 2 years, experts say around 1/3 of the total delivery industry will be transferred to the online and mobile delivery market. New competitors are now looking to jump in. One social commerce company has been selling discount coupons of up to 30% for shoppers since February. Offering more options for a wider array of palettes in a convenient manner, it's a combination that's sure to continue enticing consumers to open their wallets and their front doors to food delivery men. Kim, ARIRANG News.
It's time for our Around the World segment. Paul, let's start with that missing Malaysian airliner. It's been over 2 months since Flight 370 vanished, and I hear the families of the missing were told to go home. I'm sure they can't take that very well.
Yes, the families were visibly distraught with lots of tears and anger. They were informed on Thursday by Malaysia Airlines that the support center for relatives based at Beijing's Lido Hotel would be closed. The company explained the move was meant to encourage relatives to receive updates from the comfort of their homes. More than 100 of the 239 passengers on board Flight 370 were from China. Meanwhile, the search operation continues, involving satellites, ships, and high-tech underwater equipment. But it's failed to turn up any trace of the Boeing 777, which disappeared on March 8th. The visual search was called off this past week, but investigators say they believe the wreckage lies at the bottom of the southern Indian Ocean. Australian Search Chief Angus Houston said on Friday that the probability of finding the missing jetliner has dropped, but he remains hopeful that the bluefin underwater drone may find something soon.
Thus far it has found nothing, and we've covered about 500 square kilometres thus far. That's just the way it is. I still am hopeful that the bluefin work that we do between now and the end of May might still find something. But I must say the chances of finding it, I think the probability is lower than it was when we started the search.
A very tragic accident, and I hope the families can get some kind of closure that they very much deserve. Now, moving on to China, Paul, where the country is reeling from yet another mass knife attack. What's the current situation like on the ground?
Well, security remains high at the main train station at China's western city of Urumqi 2 days after the attack, which killed 3 people and injured 79. Train services resumed on Thursday despite the overnight explosion and stabbing spree by a knife-wielding gang in the troubled Xinjiang region. The U.S. State Department has condemned Wednesday's violence, saying that it appeared to be an act of terrorism.
The United States condemns the horrific and despicable acts of violence against innocent civilians at the train station in Urumqi in Xizang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China. We offer our condolences and sympathies to the victims, their families, and all those affected by this tragedy.
The Chinese government says the terror attack was carried out by at least 2 suspects with a history of religious extremism. They say both people suspected to have struck bystanders with knives died in the explosion. The brutal incident was the 3rd such high-profile attack against civilians in 7 months, blamed on Muslim Uyghur rebels.
Now, turning to the situation in Ukraine, pro-Russian activists have taken over yet another government building as Kiev launches a military crackdown. Can you tell us about the latest there?
Sure thing. What began as a peaceful May Day celebration quickly turned to violence in Ukraine's eastern city of Donetsk as riot police clashed with pro-Russian activists who seized the prosecutor's office. The protesters now occupy a number of key government buildings in dozens of other flashpoint cities and are demanding a Crimea-style referendum be held by the end of next week. The move comes as the Ukrainian government launches a military operation to retake the town of Slavyansk from separatist groups. Ukraine's Interior Ministry says 1 helicopter was shot down with missile launchers and that at least 1 pilot was killed. However, some rebels claim 2 helicopters were taken down and that another pilot was rescued.
There was another helicopter shot down. We tried to approach it, but then we decided to save at least 1 pilot. You know, he was abandoned by his own people. They came up to him and just took the pistol.
Ukraine's acting President Alexander Turchinov has reinstated conscription among the escalating unrest. Kiev has accused Russia of financing and arming the separatists, but Moscow has denied the allegations. Russia's foreign ministry has warned that any assaults by Ukraine's troops in the region would have, quote, catastrophic consequences.
And Paul, before we let you go, let's focus on Africa. U.S. State Secretary John Kerry held talks with African Union officials in Ethiopia. What did he have to say there?
The American State Secretary John Kerry says the recent killings in South Sudan present a serious challenge to the international community. The United Nations this past week warned that a power struggle between South Sudan's leaders is driving Africa's newest nation towards widespread violence. Kerry warned of a possible genocide in South Sudan if more peacekeepers are not quickly deployed to end the conflict, and that the U.S. is considering taking action alone.
There are very disturbing leading indicators of the kind of ethnic, tribal, targeted, nationalistic killings taking place that raise serious questions, and were they to continue in the way that they've been going, could really present a very serious challenge to the international community with respect to the question of genocide.
Kerry arrived in Ethiopia on Wednesday on his first stop of an African tour to promote democracy and human rights. He'll be wrapping up his 4-nation tour on May 5th. Jetty?
All right, Paul, thanks so much for that update, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Time to get a check on the weather conditions with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Well, it was a wonderful spring day here in Seoul, perfect for outdoor activities, but clouds and rain have moved in at the moment. Shifting our focus for a bit, conditions on Chindo worsened compared to yesterday. Visibility remains low at 2 kilometers with strong winds blowing at 6.8 meters per second. Now, today marks the last of spring tides, and from tomorrow through Tuesday is when we'll get mean tides. During then, tidal currents will slow down 0.2 of a meter every day. As for our current conditions, now the central regions will briefly be under the influence of a low pressure trough from the north. This is why we're seeing showers there. For those of you who didn't know, we have a 4-day long weekend coming up. Tomorrow is shaping up to be a lovely spring day, perfect for outdoor activities. But keep in mind that nationwide rain awaits us on Sunday. Also, that unwanted guest fine dust may kick in again between Sunday and Monday. Looking ahead at tomorrow's readings, Seoul peaks at 19 degrees while Daegu and Gwangju reach 24. Taking a look at other places, Jeju starts off the day at 13 degrees with a high of 19, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 16 and 12. That's all the updates I have for you at this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
And I'm signing off here as well for now, but we'll be back here at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.